I watched my son-in-law pour himself a glass of my 30-year-old bourbon like he owned the place, and I knew that one envelope in my jacket pocket was about to change everything he thought he knew about his future. Let me back up. My name is Arthur Benning. I'm 67 years old, retired after 31 years as a civil engineer with the county of Maricopa, and I have spent the better part of my adult life building things meant to last. Bridges, drainage systems, and one beach house on the Gulf Coast of Florida that I built with my own two hands over the course of 4 summers. Starting the year my wife Patricia was diagnosed with MS, and we decided that if life was going to get harder, we were at least going to have somewhere beautiful to go when it did. Patricia passed 8 years ago. The house is still standing. It's a 3-bedroom place just outside of Apalachicola, modest by some standards, but every board in that floor is one I laid myself. Every window frame, every porch railing, every cabinet in the kitchen, I built them. Patricia picked out the tile in the master bath. We drove 4 hours to find it at some little shop in Tallahassee that she'd read about in a magazine. Pale blue like the inside of a conch shell. She said it made her feel like she was already in the water. I go down there every October, sometimes just for a long weekend, sometimes for 2 weeks. It's the one time of year I stop being a widower living in a too-quiet house in Phoenix and start being somebody who still belongs somewhere. This past October, I drove down instead of flying. 14 hours. I like the drive. I stop in Mobile, get a plate of fried shrimp at a place I've been going to since 1987, sleep in the same motor lodge off I-10, wake up and finish the last 2 hours with a cup of coffee and the windows down. It's the ritual of it. Patricia used to say I didn't take vacations, I took pilgrimages. She wasn't wrong. I didn't call ahead. I never call ahead. It's my house. I pulled up the gravel driveway a little after 10 in the morning on a Tuesday in early October, and before I even cut the engine, I could see that something was off. There was a white Suburban parked where I usually park, and a Kia with an out-of-state tag behind it, and what looked like a child's inflatable pool toy propped against the side of the porch. A pink flamingo, the kind you blow up and float on. I sat in my truck for a minute. The front door was open, not unlocked open. Screen door shut, but the main door wide open, and I could hear music coming from inside. Something with a lot of bass. And voices. I got out slowly. My right knee has been giving me grief since a fall 2 years ago, so I don't move fast. I walked up the porch steps and knocked on the frame of the screen door, which felt absurd given that it was my house, but something in me needed to knock. Nobody came. I opened the screen door and walked in. There were people in my living room. A woman I'd never seen before was folding laundry on my couch. My couch, the one Patricia reupholstered in that dark green fabric the summer before she got sick. 2 kids were on the floor in front of the television. The old one I'd left there because I never got to replacing it. A man in a tank top was standing at my kitchen counter eating what appeared to be a bowl of cereal, looking at his phone. And then my daughter came out of the hallway. She stopped when she saw me. Her face did something complicated. Surprise, then something I can only describe as the look of someone who has been caught but is calculating very quickly whether or not they can still talk their way out of it. "Dad," she said, "what are you doing here?" I looked around my living room. I should be asking you the same thing, Jolene. Her name is Jolene Patricia Benning Howarth. She's 38. Her husband is a man named Kyle Howarth, who is the man in the tank top, and who I noticed had not put down his phone or his cereal bowl. We needed somewhere to be for a little while," Jolene said. "Things have been really stressful, and Kyle's mom needed to get out of. Who are these people?" The woman folding my laundry looked up. She gave me a smile that was a little too practiced. "I'm Beverly, Kyle's mom. This is such a beautiful home." "Thank you," I said, because some reflexes don't have enough switch. "When did everyone arrive?" "About 3 weeks ago," Beverly said pleasantly, as though 3 weeks in a stranger's house was nothing at all. 3 weeks. I looked at Jolene. You've been here 3 weeks. We were going to tell you when. Kyle finally put the phone down. He set the cereal bowl on my counter, not in the sink, on the counter, and crossed his arms. Kyle is 41, and he has the particular energy of a man who has never been held responsible for anything long enough to learn from it. He manages, and I use that word loosely, some kind of social media marketing venture that has been perpetually on the verge of taking off for the entire 9 years he and Jolene have been married. Arthur, he said, we were going to reach out. Jolene's been dealing with a lot, and we needed a soft landing spot. I figured you wouldn't mind. You figured I wouldn't mind. It's not like you're using it. I want to pause here and tell you that I have never in my life struck another human being in anger. I've come close. That moment was probably the closest I've ever come. Not because of what he said exactly, but because of the way he said it. Breezy, almost bored, like I was the one being unreasonable for showing up to my own property. This is my house, I said. My wife and I built this house. She is buried in Phoenix, and this house is the last place on earth where I still feel close to her. And you've had your mother sleeping here for 3 weeks without asking me. Beverly made a small sound. One of the kids on the floor had turned around to look at me. Dad, please don't make a scene, Jolene said. Jolene. I kept my voice very even. I learned a long time ago that the calmer you sound, the more seriously people take you. I drove 14 hours to get here. I did not know you were here. I did not give you permission to use this house, let alone to bring additional guests. I want you to tell me very clearly what is going on. What came out over the next hour was this. Kyle's marketing venture had finally and definitively collapsed. They'd burned through most of their savings. They'd been renting a condo in Atlanta, and when they couldn't make last month's rent, Jolene had made the decision, without telling me, to pack up and come down to the beach house to, as she put it, regroup. Beverly and her boyfriend, whose name I gathered was Doug, and who was apparently napping in the second bedroom, had come down to help with the kids and ended up staying. How long were you planning to stay? I asked. Jolene and Kyle exchanged a look. Through the holidays, Jolene said. Probably. Through the holidays, that was 3 months. And when were you going to tell me? We were working up to it. Did it occur to you that I might come down here? You always fly, Jolene said, and I could hear in her voice that she'd actually use this as part of her reasoning. I always fly. She knew I drove this time because I'd mentioned it in passing months ago, and she had apparently not retained that detail. That was when Kyle stepped in again, and here is where things went sideways in a way I was not prepared for. Look, he said, I know this isn't ideal, but you have to understand our position. We're family. This house has been sitting here empty for 11 months a year for the last 8 years. Jolene's mom helped pay for some of this, didn't she? So in a way, Jolene has a claim here too. The room got very quiet. I looked at my son-in-law for a long moment. Patricia did not help pay for this house. Patricia was sick for most of the years we were building it and used her energy for things other than writing checks. What Patricia contributed to that house was not financial. It was everything else. And this man who had shaken my hand at our first meeting and called me sir was now standing in my kitchen suggesting that her death gave his wife some kind of legal stake in my property. Get out, I said. Dad, I'm not speaking to you right now, Jolene. I'm speaking to your husband. I looked at Kyle. You are not on the deed to this house. Your mother is not on the deed. You are not invited here. And what you just said about my wife, I want you to think very carefully about whether you want to continue this conversation. Kyle raised his hands in that way people do when they want to look reasonable while not actually backing down. I'm just saying, legally speaking, you don't know what you're speaking, I said, and I think you should stop. Beverly, I will give her credit, had quietly gathered the two kids and taken them outside. I heard the screen door close. Jolene started crying. She does this, she always has, when a situation becomes uncomfortable. When she was 16 and wrecked the car, she cried so hard I forgot to be as angry as I needed to be. I have spent years unlearning the reflex to comfort her when her tears are a tactic rather than a genuine response. We have nowhere to go, Dad. We have literally nowhere. You have family, I said. You have Kyle's father in Tennessee. You have your cousin Renata in Savannah. You have options. Those odd options, they're more of an option than my house is. I left them in the living room and walked out to the porch. I needed a minute. I sat in the old rock of Patricia, and I brought down from her parents' house in North Carolina, the one with the loose left arm I keep meaning to fix, and I looked out at the water. The Gulf was flat and silver that morning, the way it gets in October, when the tourist season's over and the real Florida comes back. Pelicans, quiet, the smell of salt and low tide, and something faintly like pine from the trees down the road. Patricia would have known what to do. She always did. I am a man who can design a drainage system for a 100-acre development, but I have never been particularly good at the emotional architecture of family. I sat out there for maybe 20 minutes. Then I went back inside and I made a phone call. Not to the police. Not yet. I called my attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who I have known for 22 years and who has a gift for making things very clear very quickly. I explained the situation. Gerald listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I pay him for. They have no legal claim, he said. None. You own that property outright. No cosigners, no shared title, no verbal agreements that could be construed as tenancy. Nothing. Then they're trespassing. You can have them removed. I know that. I want to know the cleanest way to do it. Gerald told me. He also told me something I hadn't considered, that if they refused to leave, depending on how long they'd been there were specific procedures in Florida I'd need to follow. 3 weeks was not long enough to establish any kind of tenant status, but I needed to be careful. He said he'd draft a formal notice and email it to me within the hour. I sat at the kitchen table, my table, the oak one I refinished the summer. Patricia got her first wheelchair, and I waited for the email. Kyle came in and poured himself another cup of coffee. He did not offer me one. I want to talk about this like adults, he said. I'm listening. Jolene is your daughter. She's struggling. Is it really worth all this over a house you visit once a year? Yes, I said. He blinked. I don't think he expected that. She's my daughter, I said, and I love her. That has nothing to do with whether what you've done here is acceptable. It's not. And I want to be very clear with you, Kyle. The fact that she's my daughter is the only reason I'm giving you until the end of this week to arrange alternative housing. If you were strangers, I'd have already called the sheriff. The end of the week, he said. That's 5 days. It's 6 days, actually. I'm being generous. He set his coffee mug down. For a moment, his jaw tightened, and I thought he was going to argue. Then something shifted in his face, some calculation running its results, and he nodded once and walked out of the room. The email from Gerald arrived 40 minutes later. I printed it out on the little portable printer I keep in my truck for job sites. Old habit, and I set it on the kitchen counter where Kyle would see it. The rest of that day was quiet in the uncomfortable way that houses get when people are avoiding each other. Beverly kept the kids outside. Doug, the boyfriend, appeared briefly, a large man in cargo shorts who seemed thoroughly uninformed about the situation and who asked me if I wanted a beer in a tone of such genuine friendliness that I almost didn't resent him. That night, Jolene came and found me on the porch after the kids were in bed. She looked tired, not the performance tired of someone working an angle, but actually tired. There were shadows under her eyes I hadn't noticed that morning, and she pulled her hair back the way she only does when she's not trying anymore. She sat in the other rocker, the one that doesn't have a loose arm, and for a while, neither of us said anything. Just the water and the bugs, and somewhere down the road a dog barking at something. Mom would be so disappointed in me. She finally said, "Your mother was never disappointed in you. She would be now." I let that sit. It wasn't wrong. "When did things get this bad?" I asked. "Financially. About a year ago, maybe more. Kyle kept saying it was turning around. I kept believing him." "You knew?" "I knew it was tight. I didn't know it was this tight until the landlord called me directly because Kyle hadn't been returning his calls." She paused. "He'd been paying rent late for 4 months. He didn't tell me." I looked at my daughter. 38 years old, 2 kids, a husband who had been lying to her about money for at least a year. Some of my anger shifted direction. "Did you tell him to lie to me too, or was that his idea?" A small, miserable laugh. "His idea. He thought you'd come around if we were already here. He said you wouldn't make your grandkids sleep in a car." "I wouldn't. But that's manipulation, Jolene, and you know it." "I know. Your children were never in danger of sleeping in a car. You have family. You could have called me." I was ashamed. Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly. "I was so ashamed, Dad. I'm almost 40 years old and I can't keep my own life together. This is the part where I want to be careful, because I don't want to sound like I have no heart. I have a heart. It's just a heart that belongs to an engineer, which means I think in terms of structure and load-bearing capacity. And what happens when the wrong things are asked to carry too much weight?" I put my hand on her arm. "You can call me," I said. "You can always call me. But calling me is different from showing up unannounced with 6 people and using my house like a hotel and letting your husband make speeches about your mother's estate." She flinched at that last part. "I didn't know he said that," she said quietly. "I believe you." We sat out there for another hour. I told her about the formal notice and what it meant legally. I told her I wasn't trying to punish her. I told her that I had some money set aside. Not a lot, but enough to get them through 2 or 3 months in a decent rental somewhere, if they were willing to make a real plan instead of a temporary one. I also told her that the money came with conditions, that Kyle needed to get a real job. I didn't care what. I'd worked a hardware store at 40 to put myself through a night certification course. Nothing was beneath a man who needed to provide for his kids. That they needed a budget. That she needed to be in the loop on their finances from now on. Every month. No exceptions. She listened. She didn't argue. "What if he won't do it?" she asked. "That's between you and him. But the money is conditional, and those are my conditions." Beverly and Doug were gone by Thursday. They loaded up the Suburban early in the morning, Beverly pausing to hug me in the driveway with an unexpected sincerity that I didn't quite know what to do with. "She loves you very much," Beverly said, meaning Jolene. "She just doesn't always know how to ask for help the right way." "None of us do," I said, because it was true. Kyle left last on Friday afternoon. He loaded the Kia with the last of their bags while Jolene buckled the kids in. He came over to where I was standing on the porch and held out his hand. I shook it. "I owe you an apology," he said. "What I said about Patricia, that was out of line." "Yes," I said. "It was. I'm going to do better." I nodded. I didn't say I believed him because I wasn't sure I did, but I wasn't sure I didn't. People surprise you sometimes, in both directions, and I'd been wrong about people enough times to stay humble about my predictions. Jolene hugged me for a long time before she got in the car. Neither of us said much. The kids waved from the back window as they pulled out of the driveway, and I watched the Kia until it turned onto the main road and disappeared. I stood on that porch for a while after they were gone. The Gulf was doing its October thing, flat and silver and ancient. A brown pelican was working the shoreline, that prehistoric dip and glide that pelicans do, completely unconcerned with any of the things that had happened in this house over the past 4 days. I went inside and I walked through every room. Beverly and Doug had been in the second bedroom and they'd left it reasonably clean, which I hadn't expected. The kids had been in the third room and there was a crayon drawing on the back of an envelope on the nightstand. A house with a yellow sun and what might have been waves, or might have been waves, or might have been grass, and two stick figures on the porch. I kept that drawing. I opened every window to let the October air move through the house. I made a pot of coffee and took it out to the porch, and I sat in the rocker with the loose left arm, and I did what I always do when I come to this place. I talked to Patricia. Not out loud, usually, or not much. Just the awareness of her that this house holds in a way my house in Phoenix never quite has. The pale blue tile she picked, the railing we painted 3 times before she was satisfied with the color. The kitchen window that faces east so she could have her coffee in the morning light. I had let my daughter use my house as a solution to a problem she should have brought to me directly. I had let my son-in-law say things in that house that had no business being said there. I had watched 6 people settle into the spaces Patricia and I had built and made it their temporary convenience, and I had handled it, not perfectly. I am 67 years old, and I have never handled anything perfectly. But I had stayed calm when I needed to be calm, and firm when I needed to be firm, and I had held open a door for my daughter without letting her walk all over the threshold to get through it. Patricia used to say that love without limits isn't love, it's just enablement, wearing a warmer coat. I spent too many years not fully understanding what she meant by that. I think I'm starting to. The most useful thing I ever did for my daughter was the hardest. I stopped pretending the problem wasn't there and started treating her like someone capable of solving it. Whether or not she rises to that, that's hers to decide, not mine to carry. The pelican had moved on down the shore. The coffee was gone. The sun was coming up over the pines to the east. Orange light moving across the water the way it does in October, slow and unhurried, like it had nowhere else to be. Neither did I. Not for the next 2 weeks. This was still my house. It always had been.